Good afternoon, Religion and Modernism students. Welcome to our Week 7 webcam. I hope this week, this Easter week or Holy Week, or however you choose to acknowledge or not acknowledge this week has been a productive one and an enriching one. I hope that my emails have helped a little bit with your readings. I hope that as we move to the quick conclusion of this class and our exploration together, that these next couple weeks readings will help you think about this subject moving forward. This week there are readings. Our readings are related to method in terms of art historical method. How do we as art historians, now mindful of religion and religion's inextricable relationship to modernity, apply that and think through that as we do our art historical research and our art historical interpretation. And how is it a means for us to help to understand the work of art better, to understand the artists better, to understand the context within which they were working better, and to have conversations with other scholars and to contribute to the growth, to the public growth and development of art historical knowledge and how we understand particularly art and artistic practice that has occurred over the last few centuries. So we've talked about this model, the idea of secularization, that simply by confronting the truth of science and the empirical method, that religious faith has just inevitably melted away, and that could not be further from the truth. And in fact, we've looked at how religious practice remains not just a part of modernity, but it is a part of what it means to be human, and how we understand ourselves as rational, creative, feeling, thinking human beings. But how do we take that approach? How do we utilize that approach and produce good art history and produce good interpretations of works of art? And I want to talk just briefly about one of the dangers of a religious approach to modern contemporary art. It's a danger that I face each day. A temptation that I try to be mindful of, and at times I'm more successful than others. But it has to do with the religious commitment of the interpreter and what really is at stake in terms of the art historical work or the curatorial work or the critical work in and around art and the work of art. I'm trying to understand what the artist was doing and trying to understand what that work of art is doing when it addresses a viewer. And so what I would like to talk a little bit about is how we can fall in love with our interpretations. It can become an ideology. It can become what we are really looking for. That's all we care about. We're looking for little bits and pieces of religion. We're looking for the history of modern and contemporary art to be really covert religion practiced by other means. And so we may tend to exaggerate it. We may tend to impose our own personal beliefs of what that religious practice is or what religion should be. Many artists have been influenced by Eastern mysticism, Buddhism, for example. And if we approach their work solely from a particular religious commitment that we possess, say Western Judeo-Christian, how we understand religion may do violence to understanding that work of art. And so that's one of the reasons why I included this book review of The Buddha Mind in Contemporary Art for you this week, an article that I located just out of happenstance and scanned it this week for you, just to give you a sense of perhaps some of the difficulties of trying to think more broadly about religion and from particular religious commitments? Or how about an art historian or a theorist who doesn't share any religious commitment, that doesn't practice it, that doesn't go to temple on Saturday or church on Sunday or read sacred books and believe them as somehow especially given to us by God, but who nevertheless, as a scholar, sees the historical workings of religion within the context of modern contemporary art, beyond which the individual scholar can be simply seen as expressing their personal commitment. And that's one of the dangers. That's where it becomes ideological, and that's where we see this in left-wing critical approaches. A Marxist will use art and artistic practice to justify the survival and the thriving of Marxism as a particular worldview. And a psychoanalytic critic will simply put a work of art on the couch and use that method as a way of affirming and deepening the strength of psychoanalysis and its goals, and not necessarily pay as much heed as the scholar should to the intentions of the artist, the historical context, how that work has been received over the generations. So it's a very difficult, very fine line that that we as scholars, particularly any scholar who is working from any kind of commitment, which is all of us, the challenge we face. And so in many ways, this question of religion and how we approach a work of art to bring out certain aspects of it is really central to what it means to do art history and the methodological opportunities and also the dangers. And one of the dangers, one that I find that I struggle with often, is to fall in love with my interpretation. I begin to think that every time I see a particular gesture or I see a particular manifestation in a work of art, that just fits very easily into my interpretive wheel. And so my interpretive wheel gains more and more strength. It becomes more inevitable. And at times I forget that it's my interpretive machinery. And so the discipline of a scholar, the discipline that I try to exhibit, is to hold those interpretations lightly and to not rush to conclusion, to not find covert Christianity in every work of art, for example, or covert atheism, or covert materialism, or covert Marxism, or covert psychoanalysis, in which the interpretation becomes, the ideology becomes a sacred cow, and artists and works of art are just simply grist for the mill. A particular example, certainly with my 20-year relationship with the artist Enrique Martinez Celaya, an artist who works from an atheistic perspective, but he's often fond of quoting Wittgenstein. And Wittgenstein once said, "I'm not a religious person, but I seem to see everything from a religious point of view." And that question of what are those two senses of religion? One could possibly say a confessional sense that he doesn't share, but then also something deeper, that there is something beyond. There is a something with a capital S that is that he finds himself committed to, whether it's including both grace coming from a creator or coming from the cosmos, a gift, something given to us, life, or a demand, law, an obligation, a desire to push and to strive and to be a better person. And how one, for Wittgenstein, how one's thinking affects, relates to that. So with Martinez Celaya, I've noticed, and perhaps you've noticed in the articles the essays that I've provided for you, in many ways a bit of a test case or evidence of that. Maybe you see that I'm falling in love with particular perspectives. The notion of liturgy and sacrament is simply kind of the de facto starting point for analyzing a work of art. And for Martina Celaya, it has for me there are epistemological questions, ethical aspects, ethical implications, how I'm developing as a human being and allowing works of art to affect and mold and challenge and shape me. The strength by which I bring a particular interpretive tool may mute that, may soften that, may take the sting out of a work of art. And the work of art exists for that sting, to help us to feel differently, show us something about the world that isn't just a confirmation of what we all always believe or what everybody believes. In many ways, that's the definition of kitsch, or certainly mediocre art that seeks the lowest common denominator. But it's also one of the strategies of it's one of the strategies of other communication arts, of graphic design or advertising. You want that image that everyone is going to recognize as communicating something. But a work of art, particularly within the context of modernity, seeks to do something different. It seeks to put the spotlight on you, to separate you. And so what we want to be able to do as art historians, if we take our response to the work of art seriously, and the fact that we have emotional and existential skin in the game, and we're just not objectively, as scientists, empirical scientists, doing experiments and searching for some sort of objectivity, but if we're actually bringing our heart and our feeling and our imagination and who we are to that work of art, then it behooves us to think about religion, to think about this higher, this yearning. But it also means that we need to be careful and to not simply use it as a means by which we're telling our own story. I have to say that as a Christian, my Christianity, what I understand by it has been shaped and developed not just by reading theology and listening to sermons and practicing my religion, but it's also been practicing my work as an art historian, in particular with Martina Celaya and other artists whose work has shifted and changed my way, my approach to how I understand my relationship to God, and the relationship to the world, and who I am when I look in the mirror. But for Martina Celaya, there's a particular kind of problem that I would like to bring to your attention, and it's a market problem. The market problem is this: the fact that he's Cuban, that he was born in Cuba, that he spent his formative years in Spain and in Puerto Rico, make his work as an artist too easily, from the context of critics and curators and dealers, make it too easily fit into a certain kind of Caribbean Latin approach to art making, which is working through a Caribbean Catholicism, with certain kinds of iconography, with certain ways of looking askance at Catholicism, with its sacramentalism and with its symbols, and with its, in some ways, repressive legalism, with its contradictions. All of that is very much the presupposition that a Latin American artist is working with. And so there are preconceived notions of what religion means for those Latin American artists. But for Martina Celaya, his approach is not shaped defined, reduced to his Caribbean experience, his interest in memory and exile and his philosophical search for truth isn't limited to Caribbean culture. It's Western, European, continental, in particular German. And so the nature of the religious context, and Martinez Celaya himself has said, maybe 10, 12 years ago, he said, my work is religion or it's nothing at all. And his interest in religious belief, even though he doesn't possess religious belief and confesses a kind of atheism, is still an atheism that is deeply attuned to the beyond, to the more, to a certain kind of ethical or moral source that he's searching for. And yet, to approach it in particular ways that I have admittedly done in the past, can make it too easily operate as just a manifestation of Latin American art. And as an art historian, someone who is concerned to present the context of Martinez Celaya's work in its most robust and, to my mind, most faithful way to his intentions and his context and what he's interested in making works of art for, that tilts and distorts the work. And then it makes it too easy for people in the art world to interpret it simply as a manifestation of him getting religion out of his Caribbean soul, or working through this iconography. For an artist who is more influenced by the literature of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy than by the tradition of Mexican or Latin American art, that's a problem for an art historian. And so how I think about, say, religion and philosophy needs to be shaped less by a Caribbean Catholicism or by a kind of Christianity or religious belief that I share, and one that is shaped more from the sources that he's reading, from the sources that he is working from. And yet I bring my own belief, my own commitment to that relationship, but it is being brought to that relationship not in a tight-fisted way. That it is much more reflective and responsive to works of art. And I would say also, just in terms of noticing his work has changed in the aspects of a certain kind of Caribbean imagery that is found in his work in the early to mid 90s, begins to give way to imagery, to orientations that are not Caribbean, which also means then he's not approaching art as a means of excavating his past. There are other things, other deeper commitments that he's interested in, and I'm committed as an art historian. I believe that a kind of a religious mindfulness is incredibly important for understanding this context in which Martinez Celaya is working. And yet, I understand the dangers that I fall in love with my own interpretations, that they become just a manifestation of my own little pantheon of my own religious worldview and my own expression of my religious faith. And as a professional art historian, that does violence to the work, and it also cuts me off from other scholars for whom I am writing, and for a conversation that I'm interested in having. So how we develop that conversation is extremely important with this religious, with this kind of renewed religious mindfulness. Sally Prami's essay in Art Bulletin is a model for how a scholar approaches this subject. So as we move forward, be thinking about how we take this mindfulness and how it becomes a part of the art historical method that enhances, that deepens conversation, that moves scholarship forward, that's not beholden or dependent or restrictive of historical context and the artist's intentions, but is respectful of them and is responsive to them, as well as responsive to those that may not share our interests, or our personal religious commitments. And so finding a way to have that conversation in which what is the common goal is a deeper understanding of art. And I'm committed to the fact that a religious mindfulness is very, very helpful for understanding contemporary artistic practice and modern artistic practice. So I hope these comments are helpful to you, and I wish you well for the rest of the week, and I look forward to speaking to you again next week. Thank you.